Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things. Now today I have a bit of a discussion video for you, which is partly in connection with Victorian October, which is currently going on, and also partly just a video I have been wanting to make for ages. I'm not going to be solely talking about Victorian literature, but I want to talk about an issue to do with classics in general, which will cover Victorian literature because I read a lot of Victorian literature and most of the examples I have to call upon will be from Victorian literature. Basically, I wanted to make a video about the way that we approach reading classics and the way that our approach to reading classics might be different to the general approach to reading contemporary literature. I don't do many discussion videos, so I'm very sorry if I ramble and get off topic, and I don't entirely know what I want to say, but I know vaguely what I want to say, so yes, we will see what happens. So this video has been partly inspired by two other videos. A while ago, and when I say a while ago, I mean like months and months ago, Ariel Bassett made a review video of The Catcher in the Rye. And Ariel was saying that when she makes a review video of a classic, she feels pressure to do a really comprehensive review and to have something more analytical and almost more important to say than when doing a review of a contemporary book. She was talking about the idea that because we often study classics in school, maybe that influences the way we think about classics and makes us feel that we have to approach classics with a particular analytical spin. And I think this is quite interesting because I think often when people do read classics, they feel some kind of pressure to approach a classic with a more analytical approach than they would when they're reading a contemporary book, or they feel that when they're reading a classic, they're reading something more important and therefore they have to go towards it with a different kind of attention. Classics are not often considered easy reads, and I think this is something that's quite interesting in the way we think about classics. Now, the other video that really inspired me to make this video, it was a video by Amanda Center a couple of weeks ago. I think it was called Why Introductions to Classics Are Evil, and it was a really great video discussion about the problem with a lot of introductions that you get in the additions to classics, because a lot of these introductions are essays on the book that contain a vast quantity of spoilers, and if you read the introduction before you read the book, the entire plot and the very dramatic ending or whatever will be completely spoiled for you. Now, for me personally, when I'm reading a classic, I never read the introduction. I always skip straight into the book, and then I will read the introduction after I've finished, or if there's an afterward, then that's even better. But it is odd, isn't it, that introductions are put at the beginning of classics that contain massive spoilers for the plot. And what Amanda was saying was that there is sometimes this idea that when you're reading a classic, it's not about the enjoyment of the plot or the characters, it's about analysing and completely having a complete comprehensive understanding of the book more than it is about enjoying the book. And the introductions like this that are full of spoilers really emphasise that point that reading a classic is more about your understanding than your enjoyment, and why this might be a bit of a problem. And I think there is a fair reason why you might be less sensitive to spoilers in classics than in modern literature. I mean, let's be honest, most people know how Pride and Prejudice ends, and I bet you a lot of people who haven't read the book and haven't seen a screen adaptation still know the twist in Jane Eyre. But there are a lot of other classics that people do not know the endings of, where the endings are not well known. The book that Amanda had read where the introduction had really spoiled it for her was Villette. Villette by Charlotte Bronte is not very well known, and most people wouldn't know the ending, and the ending is quite significant to the whole book as a whole, and if you read an introduction first that told you what the ending was, then I can understand that that would slightly spoil your enjoyment of the book. So why is it that when classics are published there is an introduction at the beginning which tells you the whole plot as if you ought to know it already because it's of such cultural significance, or it doesn't matter because it's about your understanding of the book, not your enjoyment of it? And this is a bit of a problem, I think, because classics are really fun, and sometimes I feel like this isn't appreciated enough. Various times in the comments to this channel I have been called a Dickens fangirl, and I would say that that is probably true. I'm not a huge fan of the word fangirl because I don't like the fact that it has gendered connotations. It's a bit weird and it's not really okay. But I'm going to use the term fangirl within this video because it is the only word that sums up what I'm trying to talk about and what I want to try and explain. There is a lot more fangirling over contemporary literature than there is over classics, and I can definitely be described as a Dickens fangirl. The way I enjoy Dickens is similar to the way a lot of people enjoy contemporary literature and the way that a lot of people love YA. I have a picture of Dickens on my wall in the other room. I own a lot of books. I have first editions. I met Charles Dickens's great-great-grandson and got very excited. I repeatedly squealed while reading Dickens. The enjoyment I get from Dickens is the same as the enjoyment I get from contemporary books. It's the same as the enjoyment people get from YA that makes them go to conventions. I would go to a Dickens convention if there was one. I really would. I'm sure there must be one. I'm going to find a Dickens convention. That would be great. And sometimes I feel like there isn't enough fangirling over classics. Sometimes I feel like there is such an emphasis put on the studying of classics and the understanding of classics and the analysing of classics that there is not enough emphasis put on the enjoyment of the plot and the characters and the story, because yes, classics are classics because they're old and they're a significance to the history of English literature, but they're also classics because they're really good, and a lot of them are really fun, enjoyable reads, and there is no reason, to my mind, why you have to approach a classic with a different set of values or expectations to when you read a modern book. Yes, the language might be harder and slightly more different, but that shouldn't hold people back or stop people enjoying classics. I sometimes feel like the way that we approach reading classics and the emphasis that is put on analysing classics and completely understanding a classic makes people much more apprehensive about reading a classic. One thing I've noticed in doing the read-along of Our Mutual Friend is that a lot of people said they were really surprised at how funny Dickens is, because you almost don't expect classics to be hilarious, but oh my goodness, Charles Dickens and Jane Austen are the funniest writers that I have ever read. And another thing that a lot of people have been saying in the Our Mutual Friend read-along is that they found some of the language a bit hard and some of the sentences they didn't understand what they meant. And sometimes when other people doing the read-along have said that they didn't understand a particular point or a sentence, I have realised that I don't either. This is my favourite novel of all time. I have read it a lot of times. I have studied it twice, once in school, once in university, and this current reading for the read-along is probably my 7th reading of it. This is the first time that I've ever read the notes at the back of the book. Seriously, I've never read them before. Only in this read-along, because we're reading it really slowly, have I consulted the notes at the back of the book. There are still so many sentences in this that I do not understand. Sometimes I think that the reason why I adore 19th century literature so much is because I got into it when I was 13 years old, and I wasn't approaching it thinking, I don't understand this sentence, I don't know what it means, or I must analyse this and work out what it means. I just loved it for the story, because I found them hilarious, because I liked the romances, because there are so many wonderful eccentric characters in Dickens, because the plots are so weird and complex and interweaving. If I didn't understand a sentence or a paragraph or even a whole chapter, I just read on and enjoyed the next one. And because I was 13 and when I read any other book I didn't understand what anything meant, it didn't matter if I didn't understand what stuff meant in the classics, I just enjoyed them because they're fun stories. And sometimes I feel like as you get older, and especially as you start to study classics in school, you end up approaching all classics that you read with this idea that you must analyse them and understand them, and that you must have some kind of complete comprehensive understanding of them that is not to do with pure enjoyment of the plot and the characters, and that saddens me a lot, because I don't think it's necessarily the right way to approach things. And I love analysing books, of course I do. I studied English literature and history, but a lot of English literature at university. I wrote my dissertation on Dickens, of course I love to analyse Dickens and all of the classics I read. I love analysing 19th century literature, and I love analysing contemporary literature too, but I do think there is a danger in thinking that when you read a 19th century novel or any classic that you have to analyse it more than when you read a contemporary book, and that you shouldn't enjoy it as much, because it's just not the case. And I feel like if you're expecting a classic to be hard, and so when you're reading it you're on the lookout for things that you don't understand, your likelihood of enjoying it is lessened, whereas if you just read it and just went with the stuff that you didn't understand, then you would enjoy it more. And I feel like sometimes the way that we approach reading classics as things to be understood can be a danger. And I don't think this is always the way we approach classics, but I think there is a certain idea of classics that is perpetuated in school and in culture sometimes, of them being like great works or whatever. This idea that classics are highbrow, which means that we don't focus on the enjoyment of them as much. And Dickens is not highbrow. Dickens may be considered sophisticated nowadays because Dickens is incredibly long, but Dickens contains a lot of humour, a lot of sensationalism, a lot of caricatures, and a lot of love stories that are quite cheesy. I say this with full respect, I love Dickens. However, Tony Jordan, who is one of the writers of EastEnders and the person that wrote Dickensian, made a really interesting documentary in which he spoke about the fact that if Dickens was writing nowadays, Dickens would be writing soap operas, and I think that is kind of true. This is a Victorian soap opera, it's brilliant. What I'm trying to say is that I don't think that the need to analyse a classic should ever get in the way of enjoyment of a classic. And obviously there is a happy medium. For me, I am often torn between two extremes: the person who wants to analyse everything in classics and just focus on the social criticism, and the person who also loves the story and the characters. Pride and Prejudice is a really great example of this. There is a bit of me that gets very, very annoyed at the people who think that Pride and Prejudice is just a cheesy love story and forget all the sharp wit and the social criticism in here. There is another bit of me that really enjoys squealing over Lizzie and Mr. Darcy because it's really fun and it's really exciting and it's a really good love story and I enjoy them, and that's okay. It is okay to enjoy classics. I don't really know what I'm trying to say here, because I know a lot of people do enjoy classics and I know a lot of people do fangirl over classics, and especially Austen. I feel like Jane Austen is one of those authors that does get a bit more fangirling than other classic authors, but Dickens doesn't as much, and I think people often assume that because Dickens writes really long books they must be very difficult to understand and they must be things you have to analyse, and because Dickens has this high reputation as being a difficult and highbrow and classic author, therefore people are expecting Dickens to be hard. And yes, some of his language is a bit crazy and a bit weird and some of the chapters are difficult, but he's also really funny and creates these wonderful, wonderful rich characters and these beautiful love stories and these wonderful interweaving plots and these wonderful, silly, ridiculous but brilliant, brilliant mysteries. And what I'm trying to say is, I think Dickens is incredibly important. I think as a writer he is so important to the history of English literature. I think he's so important to the history of so many different kinds of novels. To be honest, important to the history of TV as well, and to the history of plot and the way we think about characters. I think Dickens is so important and instrumental and such an important writer. And I also think that everybody should read Dickens. But I don't think everybody should read Dickens because Dickens is important. I think everybody should read Dickens because Dickens is really fun and really good and really enjoyable. And I think when you're reading classics, it's important, yes, to want to understand and analyse or whatever, but it's also important to just enjoy the story and the characters, because classics are really fun. And I think that's what I mostly wanted to say. Yeah. Anyway. So I hope that made some sense. I'm not sure that it did, and it was probably just a rant/ramble. Please let me know what you think of this, and if you think the way we are encouraged to approach reading classics affects our enjoyment of them, or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, yes, what was I saying? Classics are fun.